गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा। विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा। तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे। गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
Good morning, friends, and a very warm welcome to all of you. In the midst of a very heavy and yet pleasant monsoon, it really feels nice to be back with this audience in a short span of about 75 days. Ladies and gentlemen, in continuing with our tradition, I would request Madan Vajpayee of Prabodhan Manch to welcome our speaker with a shawl, shriphar, and a book. Friends, technology has played a big role in the expansion or the reach of Prabodhan Manch Parlay. We were struggling to send out SMS messages, and we discovered another tool which allowed us to send some good WhatsApp messaging. So we are hoping that each one of our contributors and our audience did receive a WhatsApp message from us giving the details of the program. If you haven't connected to us on WhatsApp, please do so. A note on another progress thanks to this technology proliferation. Our YouTube subscription is now more than 11,300 people, and our contributors have crossed 220, and 65 of our contributors have made a repeat contribution. And yes, another technology tool, the QR code. So anybody wanting to contribute, we've now got a QR code available outside. A brief introduction to our extremely multifaceted personality who's on the stage, and it is going to be very brief. So on the left side, he's a graduate from St. Stephen's, a doctorate from Cambridge, and a professor at JNU. But I think on the right side, he's an author, a columnist, and a prolific analyst on media. So, in spite of the hangover of the pandemic, in spite of the monsoon, we've got a full audience in a 900 people hall. That tells me I don't really need to introduce the speaker. Very warm welcome, sir. George Santayana, probably more than a century ago, said, "Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it." But we can't also forget that this same history is generally written by the victor because, as they say, the winner takes it all. In a country like India, which is so diverse in every respect, but which arguably has a civilization that is more than, probably one of the oldest, but also has had invaders for more than 1,000 years. And naturally, because of that, we've had probably some distortion in the history that is taught to us. So how do we really rescue, I think, the next generation from this distortion of history? So without much ado, I would welcome our speaker, Anandji, to enlighten us. As always, we have our volunteers. So after his speech, do give in your questions, and we'll try to ask as many as possible. Thank you, and over to you, Anandji.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, to Prabodhan and to Mugangji. And in fact, I have started using the suffix G because I thought he was only 20 years old when we were interacting on the WhatsApp. And it's only later on I've come to know. And Harshad Ji as well. And I have been out and about lately, but the best gift that I've got ever is a coconut, because as they say, if life gives you lemon, you make a lemonade. For us South Indians, if life gives you a coconut, you make a coconut chutney out of it. And so I might leave the shawl, but I'm going to take the coconut along with me. And I have to say this, I'm giving a lot of compliments, but let me say one for later, because when Harshad ji was so kindly, he picked me up from the airport yesterday, I thought it's going to be a very small and cozy gathering of about a dozen people. And then he suddenly disclosed that it's going to be about 900 odd people, and I see the hall is full. So I've kind of spent the best part of yesterday writing this lecture, because when it's just the audience gives you the responsibility to be a little bit more serious. So thank you, Harshad ji, for doing that. And not only that, I said it will be better if I were to get the speech printed as well. So I requested him, I requested Mugang ji as well. And I haven't seen the speech, but they have given me what is printed. And if you remember, there was this wonderful foreign minister we had during the UPA days, Mr. S.M. Krishna. He went to the United Nations once, and he started reading his speech, and 10 minutes down the speech, they discovered it was in Portuguese. He had lifted the Portuguese diplomat's foreign secretary's speech, and he was very coolly reading it. It took our ministers around 10 minutes to say, "Sir, ye wali speech nahi hai, dusri speech." So if anything goes wrong, you have to blame Mugang ji. If I start praising the Congress or say that we don't need to rescue the history, everything is absolutely perfect, or if I say that Karl Marx has to be eulogized, then it is all his fault. But it's been absolutely wonderful, and it just tells you that we've been used over the past 2 years so much to Zoom, but there is absolutely no alternative to a real audience. So I really, once again, thank you so much for inviting me. I think we can start now, because I've kept a substantial amount of time later on for question and answer session as well, and which is what I really like, to be able to interact as well. But so if I can begin from the kind of things that I've come to believe that kind of summarizes what a non-historian's view of Indian history is, and my reading is, it is that I firmly believe this to be true, that nations weaken not because of their past, but rather by how they are taught it. And for 70 years, we have been taught to airbrush our history, taught to forget historical injustices, from Somnath to Kashi Vishwanath, from Babarpur to Bakhtiarpur, from Allahabad to Aurangabad. These injustices have somehow deliberately been made visible, as though to lionize the debasement, to celebrate the humiliation. Why? We know more about the Mughals than about Shivaji and Rana Pratap and Prithviraj Chauhan. Why? Because history written by the victors is peddled by the vanquished. And we have been thoroughly vanquished. We have to accept it. This is a country where people still go and pray at the grave of the monster Aurangzeb, who beheaded Guru Tegh Bahadur, who decapitated Sambhaji Maharaj, who demolished Kashi Vishwanath, and who murdered 4.6 million Hindus. This is a country where Guru Arjan Dev was forced to sit on a hot plate and literally cooked alive by the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. And what do? We immortalize Jahangir in our films as that affable, feather-toying romantic Salim. This is a country where a celebrated historian, or so-called historian, Ram Guha, did not want Delhi roads to be named after Chhatrapati Shivaji, the man who birthed an empire stretching all the way from Peshawar to Plassey. Because in Guha's words, the man was, and I quote him now, little known regional figure and a feudal lord who endorsed caste hierarchies, unquote. This is the country where Kareena Kapoor and Saif Ali Khan take pride in naming their son Taimur, where Akhilesh Yadav takes pride in having the nickname Tipu or Tipu Sultan, the same Tipu Sultan who wrote a manifesto that was a terrifying proclamation calling for all Muslims to come together to convert infidels and wage jihad. But I'm running ahead of myself a little here. The topic of today actually intrigues me. Forget rescuing. Forget even distorting. What in the first place do we mean by history? You see, as a scientist, the time scale that interests me is not 100 or 500 or 1,000 years, but 1 billion or 5 billion or 10 billion years, or even as the recent incredible James Webb telescope images have unveiled for us, 13.5 billion years. And on this time scale, I am not Indian, I am Ethiopian. I am not the descendant of a Ranganathan, but of AL2881 or Lucy. And I am not a creation of design, but of a conspiracy hatched by thunder and lightning and water and ammonia and hydrogen and methane and dust. Let religion and its mesmerizing literature not fool you into believing you were created by someone who wasn't a product of the RNA world. The combined efforts of the human imagination have endowed intergalactic aliens with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 nose, 4 limbs and 1 brain. Yes, we think evolution peaked with us, and that an alien worthy of being our adversary has to look and think like us. Of course it does. After all, we are the masters of the universe. We sit atop the tree of life, and all what we survey from that vantage is beneath us, crawling and writhing and inept and unintelligent and wanting to be us. Nothing could be further away from truth. We, the people, are but a bunch of living and breathing cells. That's all. We don't sit atop the tree of life. We barely manage to hang on to one of its 100-odd branches. We are a cog in this giant throbbing machine called evolution. Only a cog, a small cog. The modern tree of life is humbling to stare at. It tells us that we are just one of the millions of animals in an animal farm. Such an idea was blasphemous barely a century ago. Imagine telling all those continent-conquering SOBs that their bodies had more bacteria than human cells, that bugs complete us, that humans survive only because of an exquisite friendship we have struck with the rest of the living beings, that no one is Napoleon in this animal farm. And so nothing really matters, whether our ancestors were brilliant or not, whether our culture is ancient or not, whether our religions are better or not. We are but an inconsequential bunch of cells, as I said. Then why does history matter? It matters because, like science, it has to be built on an edifice of observation and brute facts. Because the correct understanding of it strengthens us, helps us survive. With a slight difference. Scientists like the black and white, historians love the grey. This grey has given mankind only misery. It is because of the grey that there are people who still believe in religious books or in Mao and Hitler and Tipu and Godse and Churchill and Rhodes and Aurangzeb and hundreds more who have committed awful crimes, but the believers of grey have forgiven them because they also did some good. Grey is social Darwinism gone berserk. Grey has birthed cruel empires, and believers of the grey have fettered them. Worse, our history has been written by those who believe in the grey. When I said earlier that these injustices have deliberately been made visible, as though to lionize the debasement, celebrate the humiliation, the irony is that the same people who have taught us this drilled this self-loathing in us. These same people, men and women of grey, they want others to fight historical injustices around the world. They condemn barbarians of the West, hitherto worshipped, like the Confederacy generals, Rhodes, Churchill, Pizarro, Murray, Colston, Leopold. They celebrate their roads and buildings being renamed, their statues being brought down. But here in India, this same lot eulogizes Tipu, Aurangzeb, Babur, Khilji. They celebrate the destruction of Kashi, Mathura, Ayodhya, Martand. Why? To me, the mark of civilization is this unquenchable thirst to demand justice for your ancestors, to correct a historical wrong. For that exemplifies a continuity, an idea, a memory that can never be erased, that is worth fighting and preserving for. It makes justice greater than the sum of its parts. And that is why civilizations are not fleeting like empires. That is why history is a medicine. Catharsis is a cure. If an image could speak 1,000,000 words, it would be that of the Gyan Vyapi mosque built atop Kashi Vishwanath, demolished by Aurangzeb. If orphaned stones could speak and not just weep, the stories they would tell of Mathura idols being used as stepping stones in a mosque. Why shouldn't Mathura and Kashi be washed of the sins the tyrants committed on it? But the Supreme Court has willfully ratified the Places of Worship Act that obligates maintaining all religious places as they were on August 15, 1947. In a just world, our Parliament and our Supreme Court wouldn't have done this. But they have. Why? Because we are fearful of learning our true history. It scares us, that's why. And that is why to redress and rescue India from distorted history is important. Hindu gods and their idols are as dirty as they are ugly and horrible to look at. And witnessing the destruction of temple idols gives me so much joy, unquote. The person who said this was also the chief architect of the Goa Inquisition that led to the conversion, torture and murder of countless Hindus. His name was Saint Xavier. Even our Hindu nationalist Prime Minister Narendra Modi venerates him. This is why we need to rescue our history. There are hundreds, possibly thousands of historical examples, but just one would suffice for the paucity of time. Tipu Sultan. Read his manifesto, written in his own words. As I said, it is a terrifying proclamation calling for all Muslims to come together to wage jihad. Annihilation of the infidels is a sacred duty, he writes. Annihilation. The Hindus of Coorg suffered a particularly brutal onslaught. Murders, tortures, forced conversions. Even dead Hindus were converted by Tipu Sultan, even dead Hindus. He destroyed 800 temples, 27 churches, captured 60,000 Christians, converted 30,000, killed thousands, and yet we call him a symbol of communal harmony. We have Doordarshan national shows on it. We cheer when an Indian purchases the Tipu sword. We cheer when the statue of the evil racist King Leopold of Belgium is demolished in Belgium. But we celebrate Tipu Jayanti because tyrants who murder Hindus are not tyrants, they are heroes. That is why it is important to redress this balance. From the Aryans to Aurangzeb, from Saint Xavier to Shivaji, our historians have chosen what to hide, what to invent, and what to disclose. The singular reason for this is this craving for patronage of an ideology, a government, an ecosystem, or a clique. And once our historians are done with their contortions, we, the readers, sit back and enjoy the inevitable fallout, the outing of hypocrisy. The left outs the hypocrisy of the right, and the right outs the hypocrisy of the left. and great column yards are churned out as a result of such skirmishes. But we forget, outing of hypocrisy is a virtue so long as it doesn't turn one into a hypocrite. Well, it does every single time. Villains are made into heroes and heroes into villains. We like it this way. Gandhi, Nehru, Savarkar, Patel, they are to be worshipped. They are to be made into gods, into atlases who carry the weight of our ideologies and our biases on the nape of their necks. History as myth, myth as history. It conforms to what we really are, unsure of our present, fearful of our future. The right wing doesn't want to hear anything about Savarkar that might put him in bad light. The left wing doesn't want to hear anything about Nehru that might put them in bad light. And the so-called Velco historians, as I call them, they don't want to write anything about anyone that might put them in solitary confinement away from all light. Fear and trembling, that is what this is. And the whole nation chugs along on this dead yet simmering coal, a journey to nowhere, slow, halting, tiring, until you realize what the grand plan always is, to appropriate. How else do we explain appropriating foreign destructive ideologies and their proponents like Karl Marx, Mao, Che Guevara? Do you now understand how reading a particular history can weaken a nation? Because when you eulogize these monsters like Che and Mao and Pol Pot, you also decide to walk on their paths. You weaken the nation. Do I really need to elaborate on this? Look at what the communists did to Bengal. Look at what they did to anything they have touched. And I'm from JNU, so please pardon me on that. Harshad was asking me, by the way, do you stay in the campus? I said, no, there's a huge waiting list for houses. First all the communists have to die and then only we get a chance to. They destroy anything they touch. And they still they venerate Stalin and Mao, despite knowing everything about these monsters. Mao, who killed 63 million of his own people, 45 million in 4 years flat. And if you think I'm talking abstract and philosophical gobbledygook, recall who wanted to scuttle the Indo-US nuclear deal, who was against the Green Revolution, against river linking, against dams. Recall who forbade the setting up of blood donation camps during the 1962 war with China, who castigated a fellow communist, Achyutanandan, for setting up a blood donation camp. Recall who hailed the Tiananmen Square massacre that killed 10,054 innocents. Recall who was against the liberalization. These people and their political parties are still among us, in our society, in our committees, in our universities, in our parliament. The more we are ignorant of our history, the more we are taught it wrongly. And the more these people come to power. Let me now delve into the contemporary aspect of history. Here, I will deal with the so-called modern Indian history and up to even say yesterday, so that it is history only technically, in so much that it speaks of a time past, but in effect it is the present. And here I put to you that the damage we have done in teaching this aspect of our history, in expounding on the various narratives of it, the damage is much more. In fact, the damage is catastrophic, because it is shaping not only the next generation but also the present one. History is an account, but it becomes a weapon if it is relevant in a contemporary setting. And it has been weaponized by the Congress and the left to a tremendous effect. And to an extent, that has weakened the nation. I will illustrate this with examples because that is the best way to explain what I mean. Let me begin with Mahatma Gandhi, the man who more than anyone denied us the truth, denied us the ability to be critical of the people and the things he loved, denied us the courage to be critical of religion, denied us catharsis itself. And let me issue my criticism of the Mahatma by employing a Brahmastra in the shape of a man who the Mahatma feared most above anyone else, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Nations aren't inspired through sharing ancestral genes. They aren't shown the righteous path through gene pool commandments. Nations need purity of the mind more than that of the heart. Nations need catharsis. Our nation hasn't had this catharsis. This is because we chose to follow the grey and not the black and white. We chose to follow the road traversed by Mahatma and not Ambedkar. To put it bluntly, Mahatma Gandhi was a man of grey, Ambedkar of black and white. And history shows that men who prefer the black and white are hated by all. Because let us be honest here, this world runs on grey. Grey allows to wash our sins after we have committed them. It allows us to be forgiven. Grey allows us to worship and be worshipped. Grey is actually religion. Gandhi was not a liberal. His beliefs on societal structure, on economy, on a concept state, on what Indians should eat or drink, would make even the most ardent of conservatives blush. His theories were based less on logic and more on a bizarre sense of faith-based entitlement. They can only be described as an inseparable emulsion of homeopathy and spirituality. Gandhi was an intelligent and cunning God-man. He was made for India. He held her pulse, pumped her heart. Ambedkar, on the other hand, was the only true liberal this nation has produced in the last many centuries. Gandhi was a theologian, pretending to be a politician. Ambedkar, a supreme scholar. Gandhi was a social Darwinian, Ambedkar, a Darwinian. Gandhi said he would not, quote, weep over the disappearance of machinery, unquote. Ambedkar wanted an industrialized India. Gandhi could have ruled independent India had he chosen to for as long as he wanted. Ambedkar lost an election by some margin, twice. Gandhi saw the village as India's liberator. Ambedkar called it a cesspool and a den of ignorance. Gandhi's self-confidence was buttressed by the blind devotion of his countless followers. Ambedkar's stemmed from his ability to speak his mind, stand all by himself, and appease no one. Gandhi had an army of men. Ambedkar was a one-man army. Ambedkar saw through Gandhi. Worse, the Mahatma gauged this, understood this, realized this, but like a stunned ostrich, pretended to hold fort, employing his bulwarks, his minions, who were also petrified of Ambedkar's intellect. India has forever been a land of such tragedies. The one who truly was a Mahatma fought a man pretending to be one and lost. When the Great War, the First World War that is, when the Great War ended with the disbanding of the Ottoman Empire, Gandhi persuaded the Congress to support the Khilafat movement. A violent agitation for restoration of the Islamic Caliphate, deposed by the victorious British. Before long, Gandhi pinched his nose and plunged into the murky waters of religious appeasement and terror rationalization in the wake of the ghastly anti-Hindu violence perpetrated by the Malabar Muslims or Moplas in 1921. Ambedkar, who saw Gandhi's advocacy of the Khilafat movement as a, quote, pernicious political stunt. The movement was started by the Muslims, he said. It was taken up by Mr. Gandhi with a tenacity and faith which must have surprised many Muslims themselves, unquote. Ambedkar viewed the Mopla rebellion as nothing but jihad. The Muslim agitators, he said, quote, preached the doctrine that India under the British government was Daral Harb. The aim was to establish the kingdom of Islam by overthrowing the British government. Knives, swords, and spears were secretly manufactured. Bands of desperadoes collected for an attack on the British authority. On 20th August, a severe encounter took place between the Moplas and the British forces at Pinmangdi. Roads were blocked, telegraph lines cut, and the railway destroyed at a number of places. As soon as the administration had been paralyzed, the Moplas declared the Swaraj had been established. A certain Ali Mudliyar was proclaimed Raja. Khilafat flags were flown, and Arnad and Valurna were declared Khilafat kingdoms. As a rebellion against the British government, it was quite understandable. But what baffled most was the treatment accorded by the Moplas to the Hindus of Malabar. The Hindus were visited by a dire fate at the hands of the Moplas. Massacres, forcible conversions, desecration of temples, foul outrages upon women, such as ripping open pregnant women, pillage, arson and destruction. In short, all the accompaniments of brutal and unrestrained barbarism were perpetrated freely by the Moplas upon the Hindus until such time as troops could be hurried to the task of restoring order through a difficult and extensive tract of the country. This was not a Hindu-Muslim riot. This was a massacre, unquote. These are words of not me but Ambedkar. To Ambedkar's horror, Gandhi laid the blame squarely on the Hindus. Hindus, said the Mahatma, must find out the causes of the Mopla fanaticism. They will find that they are not without blame. They have hitherto not cared for the Moplas. The outbreak would not have taken place if the collector had consulted the religious sentiments of the Moplas. Unquote. The last time you heard this in contemporary India was the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Kashmiri Hindus. They were blamed for it. Had they not been successful, had they not held all the government jobs in Kashmir, this ethnic cleansing would not have happened. The genesis is of Gandhi and talking of Mopla riots that none of us knew. That religious sentiment, as analyzed by Ambedkar, was jihad. Indeed, Muslim leaders themselves agreed with Ambedkar. Maulana Hasrat Mohani, the eulogized freedom fighter and a friend of the Mahatma, who once had coined the slogan Inqilab Zindabad, justified the massacre of Hindus by saying that this was Islamic jihad and that according to the rules of jihad, those who help the enemy become enemies themselves. Shockingly, Gandhi was conciliatory towards the Maulana. Quote, there is no greater nationalist nor a greater lover of Hindu-Muslim unity than the Maulana, unquote. Even if one side is firm in doing its dharma, said Gandhi, there will be no enmity between the two. So it is more necessary for a Hindu to love the Mopla and the Muslim more when the latter is likely to injure him or has already injured him. Why should a single Hindu have run away on account of the Mopla's atrocities, unquote. This was sheer lunacy. The Mahatma was beseeching the Hindus to hold their ground even as they were being hunted down and butchered in their thousands. One could quote more, much more, of this utterly reprehensible apologia from the Mahatma's playbook, were it not so tormenting. Of little comfort is the fact that the saint continued to hold such views despite condemnation by men like Ambedkar. Decades later, in 1947, while preaching to those affected by the pre-partition Hindu-Muslim violence, he said, and I quote, Hindus should not harbor anger in their hearts against Muslims, even if the latter wanted to destroy them. Even if the Muslims want to kill us all, we should face death bravely. If they established after killing us all their rule, after killing all Hindus, we would be ushering in a new world by sacrificing our lives. None should fear death. Birth and death are inevitable for every human being. Why should we then rejoice or grieve? If we die with a smile, being killed by Muslims, we shall enter into a new life. We shall be ushering in a new India, unquote. Ambedkar was incensed at Gandhi's selectivity, more so of his stand on the Mopla massacre. Quote, Mr. Gandhi, has never called the Muslims to account even when they have been guilty of gross crimes against Hindus, unquote, said Ambedkar. Mr. Gandhi has never protested against such murders of prominent Hindus like Swami Shraddhanand, Rajpal, Nathuramal Sharma. Not only have the Muslims not condemned these outrages, but even Mr. Gandhi has never called upon the leading Muslims to condemn them. He has kept silent over them. Such an attitude can be explained only on the ground that Mr. Gandhi was anxious to preserve Hindu-Muslim unity and did not mind the murders of a few Hindus if it could be achieved by sacrificing their lives, unquote. Another incident around the same time brought to life or light the differences between Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi, underscoring further the gap that exists between objectivity and selectivity, and how the latter is used to devastating effect in politics. It was the publication of a pamphlet called Rangila Rasool, written as a retaliation for Sita Ka Chinala, a book penned by a Muslim that claimed Lord Rama's wife Sita was a prostitute. Ambedkar stood for Mahashay Rajpal, the publisher of the pamphlet Rangila Rasool, who was assassinated by a Muslim fanatic Ilmuddin. This while Muhammad Ali Jinnah defended Ilmuddin in court, and none other than the so-called great poet Allama Iqbal carried Ilmuddin's coffin at the funeral. Ambedkar was outraged at what was done to Rajpal. Gandhi was outraged at what Rajpal did. Quote, "I am no defender of the author of Rangila Rasool," said Gandhi, adding that the book gave him deep pain. He called the book offensive and its author a mischief maker. He wanted the law changed. The law changed. In came the dreaded IPC 295A, calling for punishment for those who hurt religious sensibilities. And the India of the kind Ambedkar had imagined, an India proclaiming liberty and freedom of expression, called in our Hindu Vedas, changed forever for the worse. Incidentally, in this poster is written Ajmer. There's a 21-year-old engineer called Sunny Gupta. He was thrown in jail for 45 days. The news only came out after he emerged from the jail, so no one could even outrage on what has happened. And what was his crime? He was charged under the same section 295A that came into being after Gandhi outraged on Rangila Rasool. And what was his crime for which Sunny was charged? All he said was that Hindus should not visit Ajmer. That is all he said. That sentence offended religious sensibilities of the Muslims. Sunny Gupta was charged under 295A and he was thrown in jail for 45 days. His life was ruined. Do we know any of this? Do we know of these views of the Mahatma? Do we know that Ambedkar called him the prophet of a dark age, a charlatan, someone who bared his fangs? Worse, our knowledge of Mahatma Gandhi is embellished through that ridiculously selective propaganda film called Gandhi, and how every Indian almost danced in the aisles when Gandhi got Oscars. We know everything that Ambedkar said about Hinduism, don't we? But do we know anything at all that he said about Islam? I quote a few passages here, and you will realize how distorted our history has been. Quote, "Islam is a close corporation, and the distinction that it makes between Muslims and non-Muslims is a very real, very positive, and very alienating distinction. The brotherhood of Islam is not the universal brotherhood of man. It is the brotherhood of Muslims for Muslims only. There is a fraternity, but its benefit is confined to those within that corporation. For those who are outside the corporation, there is nothing but contempt and enmity." These are Ambedkar's words. The second defect of Islam is that it is a system of social self-government and is incompatible with local self-government. Because the allegiance of a Muslim does not rest on his domicile in the country which is his, but on the faith to which he belongs. To the Muslim, ibi bene ibi patra, which means where it is well with me, there is my country. To a Muslim, this is unthinkable. Wherever there is the rule of Islam, there is his own country. In other words, Islam can never allow a true Muslim to adopt India as his motherland and regard a Hindu as his kith and kin. Conversion to Islam or Christianity will denationalize the depressed classes. If they go to Islam, the number of Muslims will be doubled, and the danger of Muslim domination also becomes real. Take the caste system. Islam speaks of brotherhood. Everybody infers that Islam must be free from slavery and caste. Regarding slavery, nothing needs to be said. It stands abolished now by law. But while it existed, much of its support was derived from Islam and Islamic countries. But if slavery has gone, caste amongst Muslims has remained. There can thus be no manner of doubt that the Muslim society in India is afflicted by the same social evils as afflict the Hindu society. Indeed, the Muslims have all the social evils of the Hindus and something more. That something more is the compulsory system of parda for Muslim women, unquote. Why have these facts been hidden from us? This is not mere distortion. This is diabolical. This is an exercise in turning us into lambs, unsure of ourselves, unsure of who we are and what we need to do. Let me now come to the one and only Jawaharlal Nehru. Given that I am from the university that bears his name. Great man. I just said it so my career is safe for the next 15 years. Now, there are so many aspects of his policies and personality that have deliberately been hidden, or worse, airbrushed in our history, that one lecture honestly is not enough to recount them all. Allow me to summarize him in one sentence. Jawaharlal Nehru destroyed the India of Sardar Patel and Ambedkar's dreams. Destroyed. But one aspect hurts us most and weakens us most. And it is that Nehru is projected as the paragon and the protector of liberty and free speech, even till today. Historian after historian, textbook after textbook, government after government, including non-Congress governments, they sing Nehru's praises on this count. So it is important for me to bring out in detail how he treated free speech and dissent. Let me give you a few examples. First Amendment was brought in with clauses of reasonable restrictions, incitement, disruption of public order. Majru was jailed for 1 year for calling Nehru Hitler ka chela. First democratically elected communist government in Kerala was dismissed. Stanley Wolpert's book 9 Hours to Rama was banned. The book Chandramohini was banned. Aubrey Menon's The Ramayana was banned. Campbell's The Heart of India was banned. Koestler's The Lotus and the Robot was banned. Import of any newspaper that, quote, undermined friendly relations with foreign states, unquote, was banned. Aziz Beg's Captive Kashmir was banned. Fleischler's Aisha was banned. Bertrand Russell's Unarmed Victory was banned. Robson's film 9 Hours to Rama was banned. Sardanvi's Markae Somnath was banned. Robert Taylor's The Dark Urge was banned. Selling Lady Chatelier's Lover was banned. The book What Has Religion Done for Mankind was banned. Rawat Wank's Bhubat Singh was banned. Import of any, quote, obscene drawing or painting was banned. Mrinal Sen's film Neel Akshar Niche was banned. Menon's Rama Retold was banned. Tony Hagen's book Nepal was banned. The RSS's organizer was censored, its publishers prosecuted. Film Gokul Shankar was banned. Godse's Testimony was banned. Goswami's film Runumi was banned. Historian Dharampal was jailed for criticizing Nehru post-Indo-China war. Release of the 1962 war film Bhool Na Jana was blocked. President Rajendra Prasad's speech was barred from distribution. Film Jharna was banned. Draconian Press Objectionable Act was passed. Columnist Vivek was fired. His column critical of Nehru discontinued. Hindustan Times editor Durga Das was fired. His column critical of Nehru family discontinued. Congress leaders demanding Nehru's resignation was arrested and jailed. Ads to the Times of India were discontinued for speaking against government policy. Magazine Crossroads was banned. Play Nin Galne Communistaki was banned. Its actors arrested. Hindi film songs were banned from being played on the All India radio. Congress demanded a ban on the iconic film Parasakti. Film Nastik was banned. Western pop music was banned from the AIR. People's Theatre Association was banned. Play Hariprada Master was banned. Film Ganga Jamna was blocked. Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay's play Mahesh was banned. Tagore's play Gora was banned. Balraj Sahni's play Jadoo Ki Kursi was banned. Tagore's play Bisarjan was banned. Pradeep's song was deleted. 2 songs from Fir Subeh Hogi were banned. Harmonium was banned from the All India radio. Film Jugnu was banned. Editor Prahlad Keshav Atre was jailed for writing a critical article. But hey, Nehru was liberal and protected freedom of expression. I don't know about you, but till I was 45, I didn't know any of these things were done by Nehru. Not one. I knew about emergency and I knew about Kissa Kursi Ka and Andhi. But I thought Nehru Chacha was our paragon of protector of freedom of speech. This is what history does, the wrong reading, airbrushing. Lastly, let me take the most contemporary example of distorted history and our refusal to see the reality for what it is. For that, I would like to have a show of hands from this wonderful audience. How many of you, please raise your hands, know who is Mehbooba Mufti? Almost all the hands have gone up. Incidentally, these chairs and Rugang sitting there reminds me of a forlorn bridegroom who's sitting on his... That's why I got up from there very hastily, because I didn't want to be sitting with him on those chairs. To come back, how many of you know Yasin Malik? Again, all the hands. How many of you know who was Melu Ram? 2. Sagar Sahi? 3. Ajaz Bund? No one. Eklavya? Not the historical, mythical Eklavya, but the 27-year-old Eklavya. Eklavya Meena? No one. Radhika Gill? Yes, 2. These are the people who were denied their basic human rights because of an Article 370 in Kashmir. For 70 years, the human rights of lakhs of Dalits, refugees, women, Gurkhas, Sikhs, homosexuals in Kashmir were ruthlessly trampled upon because of a bad law called Article 370. They were warriors, fighters, postgraduates, PhDs, doctors, but they could get a job only as a sweeper or a security guard. And no one did anything about it. None of us, we even knew about this. Why? Why shouldn't we call this generation that did nothing about this as casteist, xenophobic, bigoted, misogynist, homophobic? 600 Indian states were happy to melt into one India, but somehow Kashmiris think they are special. Why? 1.3 billion Indians are constitutionally not discriminated against, but somehow Kashmiris think they are superior. Why? And still there are those who say that removing Article 370 is wrong. They can only say this because of 2 reasons. That they think they are not equal to others, and that they think their faith makes them superior. Science destroys both these arguments. The road to normalcy in Kashmir is paved with humility and equality and a correct reading of history. Is our nation weakening on account of Kashmir? I put to you a direct consequence of not being taught the correct history. We don't know who Sagar Sahi, Melu Ram, Ejaz Bund, Eklavya Meena, Radhika Gilla. We don't know their names, but we know who Yasin Malik is. What does it tell you about our reading of our own history? To end then, history for us is either to be hidden or invented. We tell and retell what we like of it, and what we don't, we scrunch it up and slip it under the mattress like a plastic bag. For the victors, a quill to write history with, for the vanquished, the burden to peddle it. But we forget, history is not homeopathy. It does not work as a placebo when diluted. It simply disappears. We owe it to our survival to be ruthlessly honest about history. We owe it to science to make sure history doesn't disappear. Lastly, I would like to touch upon something contentious and controversial, and what this lecture would hopefully enforce. All of us here in this audience, composed thankfully overwhelmingly of the right and the non-left, know that we have fought with each other at some point of time. Indeed, it is one of the principal laments of the right that the right fights amongst itself. You must have seen that meme of the old Rishi Muni saying, "Lado, samapt kar do ek dusre ko, khoob lado." I have also used that meme many times. To be sure, those who say this immediately after having a fight. But I contend that this is good. We are all here together, aren't we? It is the left and not the right that cannot take criticism from amongst its own. The right works on Darwinian principles and fighting for supremacy of ideas. It comes naturally, a fundamental and glorious reason why there can never be a right-wing ecosystem. To build a right-wing ecosystem would be to replicate a left-wing ecosystem. Nothing could be more tragic. Ecosystems are tribes. Sooner or later, they demand their pound of flesh. Slowly, they sow ideas of brotherhood and dependence in an intellectual who has just joined them. And then begins the slide. If India is to encourage the growth of intellectualism, it must understand that ecosystems as we know them are to be discouraged. It must understand the role of a patron. You can support a musician by organizing a concert for him, but you can't ask him to perform your mediocre creation. And this is what all ecosystems do sooner or later. They turn into herds and their members into little lambs, afraid to speak their minds, fearful of the consequences, scared that the flow of cash or kind might ebb. Ecosystems conceal and guard mediocrity, then promote and help it prosper. Instead, the right and the non-left must now cultivate non-conformists and dissenters amongst its own fold. Over these past 8 years, not a day has gone by when the left, that holds a monopoly on the media narrative in India, principally through inbreeding and entrenched mediocrity and a collectivized belief in lunitomes, not a day has gone by when the left hasn't indulged in wanton propaganda, selectivism, scaremongering, Hindu-phobia, shameless hypocrisy, and the institutionalization of false equivalence. From spreading misinformation and fake news to pillorying institutions like the Supreme Court and the armed forces, nothing was left to chance. The intellectuals have turned into pretenders. And the pretenders have turned into potters. They have made sure the soft clay that gets baked ultimately into wisdom and sagacity is now the clay of untold misery and mediocrity. But it wasn't always like that. No, it wasn't. That clay is special. It is the same clay that suckled the glorious Vedas that fed us, whose richness reflected silently the greatness of its people. whose texture echoed unity in diversity, whose fragrance recalled Bankim and Bharati and Vivekananda and Ambedkar and C.V. Raman, whose blood birthed Shivaji and Subhash Chandra Bose and the great revolutionary. It is that same clay. It is that same clay that trundles down our mountains and is washed over by the sin-obliterating waters of our holy rivers, and while they wait to receive that same clay, receive it in their trembling hands at Ganga Sagar before it is lost forever in the vast oceans of apathy, while they wait, we have work to do to make sure they receive this clay and then shape it into a new India, a great India. Thank you very much.
I had to ensure that I get up very soon, right? So Anandji, thanks really for setting, I think, the context. But with the questions that we've got, we'll again go back a little and try to talk, about what really is history. So, amongst the first questions, first of all, isn't history by definition subjective? And therefore, if it is subjective, how do you really recall, record, and how do you really learn from the past? Because it is subjective and it's not like a maths which is 1 or 2.
Well, to a scientist, all history must be hyperlinked. Every sentence of history must have a citation. Because if it is not done, then yes, history is subjective. You can record a scene from a battle that happened hundreds of years ago. But as you say, I give it to you that because there is no video evidence of the battle that took place 1,000 years ago, there would be multiple accounts of it, sure. But you can say that history that is more than 50 years old can have that leeway, even though there are very tight and important factual interpretations that go one way and not the other. Like Rashomon, for example, where it is proposed that there are multiple truths, not just one truth. Science doesn't work like that. There aren't multiple truths. There is the B form of DNA is double helical. You cannot say if I look at DNA from this angle, it is triple helical. If I look at it from this angle, it is not a helix at all. No. So while I do agree with you that history is not as objective as science, it must veer towards that. If we are to reduce our dependence or on a narrative that will only weaken us, we must be sure of what that historical account is. And even if we are not, it is incumbent upon us to give both accounts. So we can be partial, a historian can be partial towards, for example, Jawaharlal Nehru. But it is important for the students to be taught the other side of Nehru as well. And that is the tragedy, and I have said this before, that the luckiest children, school children, are those who are sons and daughters of IAS officers. Because by virtue of them being their sons and daughters, they travel all around India. So if they go to a BJP-ruled state, they would, through the textbooks, they would know the truth about the Congress. And if they go to, let's say, a communist state, they would know. So, the tragedy in India is that you don't get the true account by reading just one book. You have to read multiple books. That's a tragedy. But things are changing. There are historians, for example, my good friend Vikram Sampath. From his one book, you get everything you want to know about Savarkar. And trust me, because if I don't brag about my being objective and critic, but I actually read his 2 volumes so that I could find mistakes in it, and I could not. And I forget the name of the author of the so-called beautiful equation. He was a Britisher, got the Nobel Prize. escapes my mind, but Leo Tolstoy gave him War and Peace to read. And after 6 months, he wrote back to Leo Tolstoy, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the book. On page 6, one typo is there. On page 29, this is so. His whole letter was of the mistakes in War and Peace. So scientists are like that. But I could not find something that I had read about Savarkar that was egregious to a right-winger that wasn't there in Vikram's book. So I would say it's one of the very, very few books that you don't need to read another book on Savarkar to get another account that you were missing. So I think history has a lot of accounts, but at the same time we must tend towards history that is as close to becoming or narrating only one account as possible. And science is actually helping history. If you look at, for example, the RN invasion theory and how population genetics has tackled it, to all practical purposes now this theory is completely discarded. Earlier it was they invaded, then it was they migrated, then it was they interacted, now it is, chai pine aa gaye the. So they are not going to change because they're embarrassed by what science is digging out, but science is digging out. And one of the most emphatic examples of this is actually not found here, but in Europe, because for about almost 1700 years, or I don't know how many, 1400 years, the Turin shroud, you would know this, was an artifact that was considered to be a very valuable one for Christians, because that was the shroud, the cloth in which Jesus Christ was wrapped when he was killed, and through which he was then buried. After 3 days he resurrected. So that Turin shroud was then carbon dated in 1989. And they found that no, it is not 2000 years old, it is only 600 years old. Now there are still millions who believe in the Turin shroud. It is not upon the scientist who did the carbon dating to say, no, now science is not like religion. It's not, no, you better believe that this shroud is only 600 years old. No, you just kept the evidence on the table. Those who wanted to believe it, believed it. Those who didn't, they still believe in the Turin shroud. So science is helping history redress a lot of these things, and the future is very bright.
Okay. But on that, like they say, absence of proof is not the proof of absence, right? And I think especially when we are looking at some of the Indian, and I would now use a different word, ancient texts, because I don't know whether to call them mythology, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Veda. How do we go about trying to, again, learn more about them? Because are they mythology, are they history? And why as a culture haven't we got enough documentation on that?
So as a culture, I think we are really terrible at documenting things. And I used to get incensed with that because I studied in a country, UK, where they preserve, everything that they come across. It's to a ridiculous extent. I mean, someone's grandmother or would bring out a document where, oh, look, in 1200, your ancestor married there at this church, and this tree had these many apples on it. It's ridiculous. And here we don't preserve anything. And in fact, I've written about this. Why is this so? There can be multiple reasons. But I think the most, esoteric one or philosophical, if you may call it, is actually, it is ingrained in us that we believe everything exists only for a very fleeting time. When life itself is fleeting, why to preserve something like a building or inanity? So it used to incense me. Now I want things destroyed. No, actually not immediately. But I'm not that perturbed because everything actually turns to ashes and dust. So when you talk about our history and preserving of it, Naipaul has given a much more structured evidence of that in his second book of his trilogy, A Wounded Civilization, as to why have we become like this. But the fact remains that there are many who do not consider Ramayana and Mahabharata as real history. And I am one of them, I admit it. Because increasingly also, even in today's age, something is alleged in a tweet. You immediately are no longer satisfied by just a newspaper article on it. You want to see the video. And you're no longer even satisfied by looking at the video. You want to see whether it is certified as not being doctored. And you're no longer even satisfied by that. You want to hear from the association, which is a non-governmental one, whether this video is not doctored or not. So when you yourselves have 3 layers of checking and cross-checking and fact-checking, how on earth will you freely believe that things that happened 7,000, 8,000 years ago was actually true historical fact? So I don't, and this is not to say that the event did not happen. Again, in fact, one of the beautiful maps that there exists was published a century ago in Pune that lists out all the places that have been mentioned in Mahabharata, and that there you realize that this hocus pocus of the leftist concept that India is only 75 years old is utterly demolished, that you see all those places are all around India. So, I mean, of course, those events happened, but how beautifully they have been, woven or intertwined with mythology, with flying things, with all that sort of course, I mean, it's very difficult, not difficult, impossible for me to believe it. But again, I am not asking you to not believe it. I'm just saying that I don't believe it because I go for scientific evidence. That's just one of them.
Just again on history, and I think sometimes all of us like to read about battles, treachery, drama. So is it that peaceful periods which really got development in India, is that the reason they are not documented? I mean, we hear a lot about the Pallavas, the Cholas, and the Pandyas, and them ruling for so many centuries, and India doing so well under them. And it's still not very well documented. Is it because it was peaceful? Because Hindus were peaceful?
No, it is purely because the more I realize this, and it's so stark. It's just that aspect, the Hindu aspect of our history, which essentially is our history. If you were to ignore the invaders, that is also history. The Hindu aspect is so totally sidelined. I mean, it's impossible for you to even structure in your mind the kind of eulogizing we do of the cruel Mughal emperors like Aurangzeb and the others I took the name of. And yet you had an empire, a wholly Indian empire that was more than a millennia long, the Chola Empire. We hardly know anything about it. I mean, how bizarre can that be? There are more in Indonesia and in Thailand students who know about Cholas than we do, and I'm not joking. I've compared. So this was by design. This is not by accident. And and as I learn, my knowledge also in history has been very recent. But there have been some stalwarts and some new books that have come to light, and it pains you because I suppose one of the things that I did not address in my talk was that this government is hand in glove in promoting the distortion of history because it believes, according to one minister, that we are proud to have not placed even one comma in our textbook. So that was something to be proud of.
Just a minute, sir.
I'm not loud enough, am I? At least that bit is demolished.
Sure.
In a TV debate parlance, I have been muted. Fade it out. I can come there.
Yeah.
You can take the chair if you want.
I'm also taking the questions.
So one of the most startling things that I realized, and it pained me for weeks, was that all our lives, we've read this as a fact that Emperor Ashoka, after he saw the devastation and the millions that he killed in Kalinga war, he converted to Buddhism. And I learned that he was already a Buddhist for 8 years before he undertook the Kalinga war. I mean, what can I say? Your whole life is turned upside down if it's just ridiculous. Now, I want somebody to be punished for this. There has to be a class action suit. So, somebody has to go back to the original book and the education minister who okayed that book that said Ashoka converted to Buddhism after Kalinga War. That man, or woman, if that person is still alive, I need to go and JNU style protest in front of that house and say, you ruined my life. And there are so many instances like that. So many. And that is the reason why there are still people in Maharashtra who go and worship and pray at the tomb of Aurangzeb. It is akin to a Jew going and praying at the tomb of Hitler, except that their country is wiser. They did not allow for the tomb of Hitler to be built. So there is no grave of Hitler. In fact, they went to such extent that there is no longer a grave of Hitler's parents even. लेकिन यहाँ पे औरंगजेब का है, लोग जाके वहाँ पे, I don't know, it's painful after a while. It's not, you don't get angry anymore. It is beyond anger. And I just hope that the government does something. I think the government will, I think the moment BJP gets a majority, it will act. Is it working?
So one last one on the past, and then we'll move a little bit to the contemporary and the future. But again, Indian history, a lot of it seems to be written by foreigners even today. Even our ancient history is written by foreigners. I mean, what's the reason? Are we not taught enough, or did we just put it in some side part of the curriculum? Why is it that we're still dependent on outsiders for our own history?
I think a lot. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think a lot of it is to do with that we essentially are a subjugated civilization. So by our very own nature, we don't trust the sources that we build ourselves. That is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is also true, that of the sources that we have, half of them would be ideologically inclined to one side and half on the other. I mean, I mentioned Ram Guha. I mean, before I read more about our history, I used to love the fellow's books. Now I use it either as a door stopper because even flinging them against the wall can be harmful. They are so big they can rebound. So, what to do if you have historians like that person? And there are so many. So, the tragedy is, it's multifold. It's not that, and to be honest with you, it is not that it's only our country that suffers from it. We are talking about this because our knowledge is in this. Who knows, maybe in the Western civilization, there are many who were sold out. And I mean, there might be many Greek historians who the Greeks hate. I don't know, कि ये क्या बता रहे हो भाई? ये तो, ये हमारी Greek history कुछ है ही नहीं इसका मतलब. So there might be many. So this is a universal phenomena. It's just that it just happens so much in our country that is a young country in terms of not civilization, but in terms of imparting knowledge. We are very young because after invasions, and I highly recommend, if there is one book you read about the psychosis or the real, how the Indian brain works and why we are the way we are, it is that second book of Naipaul's trilogy. He explains everything, why we are a destroyed nation, a destroyed race. So something happened during the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, that completely destroyed us as a nation, and our knowledge, our associations with each other, our sense of aesthetics was completely destroyed. We are rebuilding it. So when a nation is in the process of being, rebuilding itself, it really hurts if you don't tell the truth to the people to whom you should tell the truth. So it hurts us more than, for example, America or Europe.
So coming a little bit now to the contemporary side, and I think there's a question from an audience saying, can you throw some light on the importance of the education ministry or the minister? And I think the question is very straight, saying on our first education minister. But in general, could the person there or the department have really done something to either create a better narrative or create the distortion that we see?
Now, that's an important question. Did you talk about, he or she talk about the first education minister? Look, so I can talk about the first education, but I don't want to. I want to talk about the last education minister. Because that is in our hands. What happened 60, 70 years ago is not in our hands.
Yeah.
Yes, that person was biased, no doubt about it. If you the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, if you see his speeches that he gave, very incendiary, pan-Islamic, he promoted all that. We don't know anything about that, the Lucknow speech especially. But the fact of the matter is that is 70 years. All you need is a history textbook that you need to impart to a pupil who is in class maybe 9th. Even 9th से पहले आप कुछ भी बोलना है बोल दो, टीपू महान था, ये स्पोर्ट से खेल लो, ये कर लो, वो कर लो, it's okay. But those formative years, 9th to 12th, and then the college years, you have to talk about the education ministers that we have in the contemporary time. And there it is an absolute matter of shame, because what happens is this government is only concerned with the people it has as long as it is in power. So possibly the way its mind works is that we are selecting people who are quote unquote nationalists, pro-India, pro this, pro that, and so we are safe. But you are safe only till the point you are in power. Remember this, the moment you go out of power, every one of these people will go out of their authority as well. So much so that, sorry, just to digress for 10 seconds, there's this wonderful book called Supreme Whispers, written by Chandrachud, who is related to the Justice Chandrachud. And there he talks about what the Chief Justices, ex-Chief Justices talk about, and you have to read it to realize the bizarre lengths to which Congress went to find out if any person was associated in the slightest of ways with, leave alone BJP, just the RSS as well. So there was this High Court Chief Justice of Mumbai who was slated to become the Supreme Court judge, and Indira Gandhi found out that this gentleman attended the funeral of RSS Gowalkar. 2 days before he was to be made Supreme Court judge, he was not. So this thing that people have that, look, we are in power, we are going to pick up people who are, going to be of our ideology, we will tell the truth, that remains only till you remain in power. Because you haven't changed the textbooks, you haven't changed the school textbook, there still are people who still like Che Guevara, still like Mao, who still think Stalin was a hero. Unless you change the textbooks, you're not going to change the way people think. You are simply changing the way people think for the next 5 years or 10 years. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what people want. So I am not concerned about the first education minister. उन्होंने अपना काम कर लिया, वो निकल गए. I am concerned about the last education minister who said, I am proud to have not changed anything. Thank God he was changed.
So coming back to again the period when we got our independence, but just around that time, and again I think a lot of lawyer friends in this audience, including our Manch, as they say, sometimes you need to have a motive, for a crime. Assuming that distortion of history is a crime, what would have been the motive of the people at that point of time is your guess? Because you can understand maybe for the Britishers or the people previous to that, but what would have been the motive for somebody not to correct it or to leave it as it is?
Yeah, so I think there were multi-pronged motives. One was about this so-called Gandhi. So Gandhi was made into a Mahatma, and everything that he believed was peddled to us as history. So one of his things that was the most spectacularly unsuccessful was the Hindu-Muslim unity, right? And he knew the evidence was all around, from Mopla to even before that, to even people who had advocated the two-nation theory. People fault Savarkar for it, but before that was Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, and before that was in fact Karl Marx in 1853 book. He talked about the two-nation theory. So Gandhi knew that he is wrong, but still he persisted. And after Gandhi died, for the next 30, 40 years, there was this so-called almost a dogma that we will exist as a nation together, even though we had seen the pangs of partition, even though Ambedkar warned us of this. So at the altar of Hindu-Muslim unity, every truth about Islam was hidden. Every truth about what the Islamic leaders said were hidden. When you do that, you not only airbrush your history, you weaken the future generations to act. That is the birth of appeasement. Now, there is a direct correlation. That is when I say that nations don't weaken because of their past. Because nations will always come back. In 1990, 91, our foreign reserves were less than what Sri Lanka's are right now. We had, our foreign reserves right now are around $580 billion. In 1991, I mean, there are many economists out here who know it was 0.6 billion. $600 million, that's all our foreign reserves are. We mortgaged our gold, we loaded our gold into ships and set them to sail for the Bank of England. You know it. But we are now, 30 years later, we are now, we are prosperous. So nations recover, you know, they don't weaken because of their past. But I told you about when people profess those ideologies, when they are taught wrong history, when the history is airbrushed, when they still think all those monsters are actually heroes, that is when they take and implement policies that weaken the nation. So it was, and of course when Congress came, it was complete reign of psychophancy. Nehru, I told you all those things that he banned, jailed editors, none of that new. Of course it was through Nehru's command itself. After that Indira came, emergency. Incidentally, there are a lot of JNU professors who have airbrushed even emergency. There was Khushwant Singh, who said, why I support emergency. Khushwant Singh was the first one to advocate a ban on Salman Rushdie's book. And if you remember when that intolerance whole facade was going on, they held a Khushwant Singh literary festival in which they talked about the intolerance and the emergency that is happening around India.
So, sir, you mentioned something about, you know, this whole distortion or this effect shaping policy, but really how does that shape future policies? Any examples where you think some of our policies itself have got therefore badly sort of created, and how could we correct that going forward?
So absolutely, to give you an example, Shah Bano case is an absolutely apt, the appeasement that happened. And you know, socially, and I'm not talking economically, socially this nation has suffered a lot because of that single act of Rajiv Gandhi. Now that was based on appeasement. That was based on let me appease, and that appeasement goes on. It's institutionalized now. Just yesterday, the Chief Minister of Telangana has given 17 crores for 2-month payment to muezzins and mullahs from the taxpayers' money, from the money that he earns by controlling Hindu temples. So that appeasement goes on. But closer to non-societal, non-religious thing, I gave you the example of opposing even green revolution, opposing liberalization, opposing the Indo-US nuclear deal. Now that is all happening because you believe in that philosophy. Why is when people know that socialism is evil, socialism will not work, socialism will make you bankrupt. As Margaret Thatcher famously said, that socialism only works as long as you, till the time you run out of other person's money. When you know this philosophy doesn't work and you still carry on with it, that is what is weakening the nation. When you know that farm laws were good for you, that India needed those farm laws to catapult itself to a middle income economy. When you knew that all those 3 farm laws almost verbatim were there in the Congress manifesto. In fact, Modi did not go even as far as Congress wanted to go. Congress wanted to remove APMCs. Modi said, no, I'm giving you a choice. When they are in your manifesto and then Congress backtracks and says, look, these are black laws, what can you do? That is what is weakening the nation.
So, sir, and you, like we mentioned, on your left side is your JNU. But, you know, a question from the audience saying, and I think in the end you alluded to how we should try and create a fairly open and sort of equal-sided. So how do we establish diversity of opinions, especially in our colleges? And should the state play a role in that?
So yes, I mean JNU. Firstly, we're very lucky because no one cares about the scientists. We are on the, and thankfully we are on the other side of the Iron Curtain in JNU. So that's, the Iron Curtain extends from the East Gate to the Ganga Dhaba. So there's like, we are on this side, so we are safe. No, but to be honest with you, all opinions are welcome. They must happen, especially in a university. But we know that it is the left that doesn't want those opinions, because they know it stems from this, there's almost a psychiatric term, and Dr. Harsh is there, he knows there's something called the guilt of inadequacy. When you know something is not working, when you believe in something that is plainly wrong, and you continue to believe in it, then you are embarrassed by it. A hate builds up against people who don't believe it in anymore. So, I mean, don't communists know that every nation that has professed communism throughout human history has been totally destroyed? Don't they know it? Haven't they seen it? USSR, Venezuela, China, until it switched to a different economy, and still you have communists. So, I mean, I'm not there to say you cannot be a communist. I mean, it's your mind, it's your brain, and you go ahead. But the fact of the matter is, they will not allow for it's like a religion. I mean, why did Galileo have to apologize? He had to apologize because those other people there, the church, they feared him. They said, look, if tomorrow what he says becomes the truth, then people will stop following us. So it is out of fear, and that is out of guilt of inadequacy. And that the left has mastered. So that is why it wants to hide the truth. Because if it tells the truth, then people will be informed, they will make their choice, and they would no longer be communists. Thankfully now even Nota gets more votes than communists. So, so slowly things are improving. But still you have communists, and they're very clever because they know this. They're no longer concerned with, I mean, they know they're not going to get to power ever again in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, but they have their fiefdoms, and they're protecting it. And those fiefdoms are universities. Those fiefdoms are knowledge centers, and that is this government doesn't realize that power is not in Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. Power is in where the education is. That is where the power is.
So, coming to that, two questions, and again from the audience. The first one, and again these are a bit saying what will you do in the future. So, one, history, the way it is taught and where is it taught, and the fact that we've just put it in some section called liberal arts. And second, the revision of this textbooks. How do we address this issue, and what are your suggestions of going forward?
So the textbook revision, first of all, it's, and I refuse to believe those who say, look, 8 years is too small a time, we have to constitute a committee. 8 saal mein committee nahi bani, yahan to we are a nation of committees. How can you say, we dream of committees? So that is wrong. But away from textbooks, you have to identify where does a child or even a student learn things, imbibes things. It is, yes, through textbooks and through exams, because no matter if your ideology is communist one, if you show, for example, if you prescribe the Black Book of Communism as a textbook, and there it is known that Mao was a monster, if you write, if you're a communist student and you write, no, Mao was great, you will get 0 marks. So obviously, you would fail the exam. But the question is not to change the mindset. It has to start from a non-textbook thing. I gave you one example. Let me give you another. I gave you the example of Narendra Modi venerating Saint Xavier. I mean, that is shameful. That should be unacceptable. Somebody should hold Prime Minister Modi to account and said, look, you cannot say those things anymore. I have just given you one quote of what Saint Xavier did. He was the architect of the Goa, Inquisition, which was as bad as Spanish Inquisition. What are you doing venerating him? And he gives, every year, he gives chadar for the Chishti, Ajmer, Dargah Sharif. Does he know the history of the man who said, I have come to India to destroy Hindu temples? I'll read out his quotes. Now, when the Prime Minister is doing it, How can you just blame the textbooks? Because the guy will come in and say, "Apne dekho Modi ji kya kar rahe hain? Tum mujhe sikhaoge." So it has to start from, the truth has to be imbibed by people who are no longer students. And by that I mean our politicians. They have to say that, look, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I have to tell you the truth about Saint Xavier. I have to tell you the truth about Sufism. I have to tell you these truths. And many of those truths will hit the Hindu people who've been eulogized. Fair enough. There is no dearth of that. Ambedkar has already done it. But the point is, it has to be across the board. And school textbooks are, I would say, I wouldn't give them more than 20 to 25% of credit for changing a person's mindset. It has to be from the very top. So Modi has to come out, the president has to come out and say, look, this is the truth about these people.
So in light of that, sir, two questions I'll take. The first one, should we teach the Hindu religious texts, especially a lot of people think that the Gita or is one of the most best modern management tool today. So should Hindu religious texts be taught in schools?
Actually, I got into a lot of controversy because this is the thing. There was a news about Gujarat making, prescribing Gita as a thing. I said, no, Quran should be prescribed. So a lot of right-wingers, without understanding what I actually meant, वो आगे उस पे वो मीम आ गया, समाप्त कर दो, लड़ दो, मारो इसको, मारो. Because, and it is not for nothing that I call Zakir Naik as my hero. I mean, a lot of right-wingers, they hate Zakir Naik. But have they ever understood why a lot of Muslims also hate Zakir Naik? Answer that question. They hate him because all he does is, he narrates the verses. That is all he does. That is all you need to do. That is all you need to do. I have never been, I'm letting out a secret out here, because I don't want anyone to behead me. I have never criticized Quran or any Islamic scriptures. I have only quoted them. If you feel annoyed by that, that's not my problem. This is what the Twitter did. I quoted verse 3359, thank you Zakir Naik, about the blasphemy verse, and Twitter blocked me for 20 days. And I told them, why have you blocked me? And they said, because this is hate speech. So I said, are you saying this is hate speech? Then they quickly unblocked me. So I don't need to comment or criticize. It is vitally important for all Indians to read the Quran. Trust me.
So as we are moving towards sort of the last part, I think there are again some questions more coming from some of our younger audience. So a question saying, we learn a lot or we hear a lot about our bright past and how it can lead to a bright glory. What are those connections? Again, to your scientific part, you may not believe in the Pushpak Viman, but again, how do you connect this and how do you connect that history to really say that's what's connected to your future?
No, I think that's a wonderful question, and I jokingly I say that we are ruled by parties that believe in either past or pasta. Now, and pasta is not going to last for very long, so we can see now. Maharashtra is gone. Only Rajasthan का भी जाने वाला है pasta. तो सिर्फ छत्तीसगढ़ में pasta मिलेगा. But it's not the harking back to the past. I love, why wouldn't one? If your history has been glorious, only a fool will not recount it. I'm proud of it. And when people, a couple of days ago, somebody was mocking the Karnataka education minister for saying that, look, Newton did not discover gravity. Absolutely true, Newton did not. It was Brahmagupta. Now, when you give the proof, and still you mock someone, now, so you can't change their mindset. So I'm absolutely not for glorifying what is our past, but at the same time, let us not take it to the extent where we add everything to it. Like, ye bhi humne kiya, wo bhi kiya, viman bhi cha. It's not true. DNA discover kiya. Nahin, it's not true. A lot of things we did, especially in the theoretical sciences, medicine, for example, or in Ayurveda. In fact, my book is coming out later this year on forgotten Indian scientists. And a lot of it, I take it back to Ayurveda, I take it back to hundreds, even thousands of years. So our past has been glorious. We don't need to, kind of invent things that we did not invent in order to make it more glorious. It is monumentally glorious. It is so glorious that it will take us years to recount the glory. And that is another tragedy. You saw a month ago, there were some really precious manuscripts, 1,000-year-old manuscripts on palm leaves. They were just rotting somewhere in a sack. So, this is another thing that we need to worry about. How well do we care about our knowledge? See, buildings, I really don't, mind too much if a building is destroyed. But if that knowledge is destroyed, that is destroyed forever. So, we have had a tremendous past, glorious past. And it is incumbent upon us to recount it. But let's not add things that never happened. So we did not discover RNA or DNA or all those things. But we discovered a hell of a lot of things that we must recount.
Sure. So, if you look at the Western world, and a lot of funding for research and a lot of funding in universities comes from the corporate world. It may have its downside because it is vested interest. But at the end of the day, that's what's kept it alive as well. So, is there some role here which the Indian corporates have forgotten, not known? Is that something which you would strongly advocate?
No, absolutely. I think a couple of CBI raids and ED raids should do the trick. But look, I think it is increasing. What is happening, unfortunately, is because there is such paucity for it, that a lot of money is being taken up by US universities to start Indian centers there. And what happens is we have fraud historians who immediately take up positions there, and then their students and theirs. So it's like, you start, it's almost dendritic. And once you start something, it's very difficult to stop it. As to how many of those endowments are coming to setting up things in India, it's much less. That must increase, especially in the arts. But again, we see this. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And if you were to, and this is again the tragedy, you have, for example, Ashoka University. It is a liberal arts university. I am not a votary for a university that is exclusively for either the arts or the sciences. The greatest ideas have always been, when there has been union of arts and sciences. And for someone to demarcate what is art and what is science itself is wrong in my opinion. So, I was the first one who really castigated this government for carrying on this funding of Nalanda University that doesn't have science as a subject. That's a tragedy. You mean to tell me that Nalanda, the original Nalanda University, did not have science and maths? Why are you giving 2,700 crores to a Nalanda University that is not teaching, scientific subjects? Now somebody should ask this to our ministers who are giving taxpayers your money, 2,700 crores to Nalanda University to have a liberal arts university. It has to be a mixture. And I think it's very difficult increasingly in our setup, and I know especially as a scientist, because what happens is our belief system is actually a very feudal one. So you have someone who did good work, decent work, he's about to retire, chalo yaar, isko ek institute de dete hain. So, and this happens a lot in sciences. I don't know whether it happens in arts or not. So there are a lot of scientific institutes that are peppered all around India that have a faculty strength of 7, 8, 9, brain research center, this limb research center, liver research center. Arey why? Human research center karo na. But uske liye, so that has to stop. We have to start, being proud of the university culture again, rather than these fixed, standalone, specialized institutes.
So, in your experience, anywhere outside of India where they may have had a similar issue of a distorted history, have they done something? Are they trying something that we could learn from?
Pakistan comes to mind. No, but and here again, I think, if there is one author I cannot recommend highly enough, it is Naipaul, and his really sense of the psychology, the South Asian psychology. So I think it's one of the two books. Is it Beyond Belief or Among the Believers? I think possibly Beyond Belief, that he talks about the psychology of Pakistan. that how it is slowly dissociating itself from the South Asian history and veering towards its history as if it emanated from the Arabs. And you can clearly see how within 40, 50, 60 years, Pakistanis do not believe that they were part of India at all. You know, they're saying that we stemmed from Arabs. Our whole history is Arab. So you see, it's, you know, when you talk of weakening a nation, in 40, 50 years, you've completely changed the whole canvas of a nation. What to talk of a university or a school. You know, here you have 200 million people thinking, completely differently. So that is why, history is so dangerous, the way it is taught.
So, just before, I think, independence, we had a lot of historians, people like Nachikekar, Major Basu, Sardesai, etc. You mentioned about Vikram, but, and again...
Which Sardesai?
So this was G.S. Sardesai.
Better specify that, please.
So again, do you see an emergence of at least people who are willing to relook at and really study and write history in probably the correct way? And how again can we encourage the Vikram Sampats of the world?
Yes, and no, definitely it is increasing. You have, J-Sai, you have Vikram Sampath, you have so many others, Anish Gokhale is one, half a dozen, maybe more. They weren't there 10 years ago, and worse, 10 years ago, the books written by the so-called historians or Velcro historians, I call them, because they stick to their preferred government, they were being thrust upon us. We were being asked to then multiply recommend their books. And that is how, the whole ecosystem was built. So now things are changing, but again we have to ask this question. And I asked Vikram this, how long did it take for you to write the volume 2? He said, actually, it's been in my mind and it's taken me 7 years to write volume 2. So the amount of work this is not a small thing, I think one aspect of which we can very quickly, you can get to a lot of authoritative, objective historical analysis if we encourage our PhD students in history to think of writing so well that their PhD thesis will be converted to a book. I think that's very important, because ultimately any account of history has, as I said, all history should be hyperlinked. So every sentence that you write in history should have a reference. Now that can only happen if you spend 4 years, 5 years in writing that book, like Vikram did. It's a labor of love, and PhD students do that by nature, of them doing a PhD. So I think if we are to encourage, there should be maybe teaching courses to guide the history PhD students to write their thesis in such a way that it is amenable as a book form, so that it will be very authoritative and objective. I think that would very quickly churn out a lot of excellent books.
Thank you so much. So the last two questions, and I think the first one is again from the audience, who's and he's put this Aam Aadmi in quotes, so it's not about the party. But the question, what should the Aam Aadmi in India do about this issue?
Sorry, about Aam Aadmi Party or?
No, so what should the Aam Aadmi in India do about this issue? How do we contribute towards correcting this or what?
No, nothing can be done. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to disappoint you. When, this intelligentsia, the wonderful audience on the podium, Mrugangji, anyone, it's just not possible, because it is what the minister thinks at the end of the day. It's not even what the bureaucracy or the ministry thinks. It is what the minister thinks. How to get it across? How to get across this fact that, look, just by proscribing one book, like I gave the example of the Black Book of Communism, it is the most authoritative book ever written on the crimes of communism. Prescribe it for college. What is stopping you? So I don't know what is stopping them. So, unless, and that is the other thing. Now we know it is almost institutionalized. Supreme Court has actually said it, not in so many words, that those who like something, those who are honest taxpayers, who don't come onto the streets, they suffer. Supreme Court has said it. He said, well, where are those who, I have seen millions who are protesting the farm laws. Where are those who are for the farm laws? And in the same vein, Supreme Court says 86% of the farmers are for the farm laws. So does it want the farmers to, the pro-farm lobby to come onto the streets? That's the tragedy. Unless you protest, unless you block roads, unless you do something, people don't listen to you. So, and I'm absolutely not asking you to picket the HRD minister or something like that, but the tragedy is unless you do that, you're not going to get your way. So please please be very aware of what happens outside of your pupil, of your son's or daughter's school. Please be aware of the new historians who are coming up, like Vikram Sampath, Twitter handles like True Indology, Sanjeev Sanyal's book. So there are a lot of things that you can do away from school. That is a tragedy. So, but if that cannot be corrected, let's forget about it. At least you can do something from your own effort. That can be done.
So, sir, I must add here that this same audience and this same hall has seen live programs of Sanjeev Sanyal, J. Sai Deepak, and Vikram Sampath. Both times he published his book, sir.
So, in fact, you have done 4 times more than the education minister of this government.
On that count, sir, again, thanks a lot. And I think what an enlightening talk that was, Anandji. I love to speak a little bit in Hindi always with my background. तो आनंद जी के आने से जो आनंद हमें मिला, आनंद जी को सुन के उस आनंद में 7 रंग लग गए. धन्यवाद आने के लिए. And like he said, I just got to know him 4 weeks ago, and the amount of, I could sense that he was extremely busy, extremely engaged, and yet he found the time to come down from Delhi, spend time with us. So for that, Anand ji, the entire audience and Prabodhan Manch, we are eternally grateful to you, sir. I will now just take a few minutes, please, if you can just wait to sort of conclude with a vote of thanks. Thanks to the BMC for this hall, Shri Tendulkar and Sairaj Publicity for banners and backdrops, Vastu Shobha for the stage, Avinash Paradkar ji for the sound, Virag Vision for videography, and Anil Hardikar ji of Abhutpurva for publicity. Thanks to our elected representatives, Abhijit Samant ji is here, generally Parag Ravani ji is always here, and both of them always find time to be with us, so thank you to both of you. This time around, we are going to make one additional thank you because there are 2 people in the audience which we want to thank. Honorable Retired Governor Padmanabh Acharya ji, sir, thanks for coming here and thank you for being with us. And a second guest who is here, she is a past speaker of Prabodhan Manch. We've always been supportive of her work. Additional Commissioner MCGM, now MD of Mumbai Metro Rail Corporation. Ma'am, we just... So ma'am, yesterday we tweeted about your appointment, but I think we truly hope you'll put Mumbai back on its rails. So I think with that, a very big thank you.
Can I just take 1 second or 10 or 30 seconds to just to say that I did not know that your elected representatives were here, sir. If I have been very critical of the government, I apologize. Please don't raid.
No, sir.
I hope there is no ED or CBI raid to my house.
A very big thank you again to our 220 plus contributors. But the last, and I always say this, I think a couple of people have asked us, because this is, Prabodhan Manch is an AOP. Most of us have something else that we do and we just meet every Friday and get this organized. But what really keeps us going is to see an audience packed to the hilt. And please keep coming, please join us, and that's what really keeps us going. Thank you. We will close with the rendition of the Vande Mataram.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujala Sukhala Malayaj Sheetala Sasya Shyamala Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubhra Jyots ज्योत्स्ना पुलकितयामिनी पुल्लकुसुमित द्रुमदलशोभिनी सुहासिनी सुमधुरभाषिणी सुखदां वरदां मातरं वन्दे मातरं वन्दे मातरम्
जय